Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be diving into the fascinating evolution of the Russian economy under the leadership of Elvira Nabiullina, the current governor of the Central Bank of Russia. We'll trace her journey from her early reforms to navigating the complex landscape of sanctions and global realignment, uncovering the strategies she's employed, the challenges she's encountered, and how her decisions have shaped Russia's economic path.
Nabiullina's journey began in 2013, when she was appointed governor of the Central Bank of Russia. Her early years were marked by a clear focus on modernizing Russia's monetary policy. She introduced inflation targeting, a pivotal strategy, where central banks aim to maintain inflation at a predetermined level. This involves carefully adjusting interest rates and employing other monetary tools to influence economic activity. For Russia, this signified a commitment to fostering stability and predictability.
Another cornerstone of her early reforms was the introduction of a floating exchange rate. This means that the value of the ruble is determined by market forces, supply and demand, rather than being fixed to a specific value by the government. This move allowed for greater flexibility and resilience. In the face of external economic shocks, imagine a boat on the water. A fixed exchange rate is like anchoring the boat firmly in place. While it provides stability in calm waters, it leaves the boat vulnerable to strong currents or storms. A floating exchange rate, on the other hand, allows the boat to adjust to the waves, absorbing the shocks and maintaining its course.
These reforms weren't just theoretical concepts. They were put to the test very early on. In 2014, Russia's annexation of Crimea triggered a wave of Western sanctions, targeting key sectors of the Russian economy. This coincided with the global oil price collapse, which put immense pressure on Russia, a country heavily reliant on energy exports. This was a perfect storm scenario, a major geopolitical event, coupled with a global economic shock.
Nabiullina's response was decisive and swift. She drew upon the substantial foreign currency reserves that Russia had built up, deploying them strategically to stabilize the ruble. This intervention prevented a more severe currency collapse. Think of it as a buffer, absorbing the initial impact of the shock. The floating exchange rate also played a crucial role, acting as a natural shock absorber by allowing the ruble to adjust to the volatile market conditions.
While these measures effectively mitigated the immediate crisis, they also highlighted the interconnectedness of global events and the challenging trade-offs policymakers often face. The sanctions and the oil price collapse led to economic contraction and rising inflation in Russia, demonstrating the ripple effects of global events on domestic economies. This marked a turning point for the Russian economy, the beginning of a period of increasing economic isolation, and a shift towards more assertive economic policies.
The year 2022 brought another seismic shift, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This triggered an unprecedented escalation of Western sanctions, designed to cripple the Russian economy. The sanctions went beyond those imposed in 2014 and aimed to inflict maximum damage. We saw a significant portion of Russia's central bank reserves, approximately $350 billion, frozen in foreign banks. This was a powerful move, essentially cutting off Russia's access to a large portion of its financial war chest.
The disconnection of major Russian banks from SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, further intensified the pressure. SWIFT is the backbone of international financial transactions, facilitating the smooth flow of money across borders. Removing Russian banks from this system was a major blow, severely restricting their ability to engage in cross-border trade and finance. It's like suddenly shutting down all the major highways and transportation routes. Imagine the disruption that would cause to businesses and individuals relying on those networks to operate.
The sanctions also targeted technology exports to Russia, aiming to stifle innovation and growth in critical sectors, like defense and energy. These actions were designed to weaken Russia's long-term economic potential by restricting its access to cutting-edge technologies. This multi-pronged approach had a profound impact on the Russian economy and the daily lives of its citizens.
The consequences were felt across all levels of society. The ruble plummeted in value, inflation soared, and shortages of essential goods became widespread. Imagine going to the grocery store and finding empty shelves, or seeing the prices of everyday items double or triple overnight. This created a climate of economic anxiety and hardship, particularly for ordinary Russians, who are already struggling with stagnant wages and rising living costs.
The situation became so dire that by 2025, Russia is projected to implement a food stamp system. This is a stark indicator of the severity of the economic crisis. Imagine a country with vast natural resources and a history of economic ambition, resorting to food stamps to ensure its citizens have access to basic necessities. This underscores the depth of the challenges faced by the Russian people and long-term consequences of the sanctions.
The sanctions also exacerbated pre-existing problems, like the housing crisis in Russia. Housing costs escalated dramatically in major cities, driven by a combination of factors, including increased demand, limited supply, and speculation. Average rents in cities like Moscow saw significant increases, placing further strain on household budgets. Imagine young people starting their careers, families trying to make ends meet, and retirees living on fixed incomes, all facing the prospect of being priced out of their homes. This added another layer of complexity to an already challenging economic landscape. In the face of these mounting challenges, Elvira Nabiullina responded with a series of decisive policy measures aimed at mitigating the effects of sanctions and stabilizing the Russian economy. One of her key strategies involved implementing strict monetary policies, including raising the key interest rate. This was a bold move designed to combat inflation and support the struggling ruble. By increasing borrowing costs, the central bank aimed to discourage excessive spending and investment, which were putting downward pressure on the currency. Think of it as applying the brakes to a speeding car to prevent it from veering off course.
Alongside these monetary measures, Nabiullina reintroduced capital controls limiting the flow of currency out of the country. This was a crucial step in preventing a further decline in the value of the ruble and preserving the country's dwindling foreign currency reserves. Imagine building a dam to control the flow of water. Capital controls act as a barrier to prevent a sudden and uncontrolled outflow of capital, which could destabilize the financial system. This measure was particularly important given the unprecedented scale of sanctions and the pressure they were exerting on the Russian economy.
Nabiullina also spearheaded the promotion of alternative financial mechanisms aimed at reducing Russia's dependence on Western-dominated systems. This involved exploring new channels for international trade and finance, seeking partnerships with countries outside of the traditional Western sphere, and developing domestic alternatives to SWIFT and other critical financial infrastructure. It was a strategic move to diversify Russia's economic relationships and create a more resilient financial system less vulnerable to external pressures. Imagine building multiple bridges across a river. If one bridge is damaged or blocked, you still have alternative routes to maintain the flow of traffic.
However, these countermeasures were not without their critics. Some argued that they came at a cost, potentially stifling business activity, restricting consumer spending, and contributing to economic stagnation. The high interest rates, while effective in curbing inflation, could also discourage investment and slow down economic growth. Similarly, capital controls, while necessary to stabilize the currency, could also hinder foreign investment and limit access to international capital markets. It's a delicate balancing act trying to address immediate crises while also laying the foundation for long-term economic recovery.
Meanwhile, the sanctions themselves were not a monolithic wall, but rather a complex web with its own set of vulnerabilities and inconsistencies. Despite the unprecedented scope and severity of the sanctions regime, there were cracks in the Western Front that Russia could exploit to mitigate their impact. These inconsistencies arose from a variety of factors, including differing political priorities, economic dependencies, historical ties, and the sheer complexity of implementing and enforcing a global sanctions regime. It highlighted the challenges of achieving a unified and airtight response to a complex geopolitical event.
For example, Hungary, a member of the European Union, maintained its reliance on Russian energy and consistently opposed further sanctions. This stance stemmed from a combination of factors, including its historical energy dependence on Russia, its close political ties with the Kremlin, and its concerns about the economic consequences of cutting off energy supplies. It created a point of contention within the EU, which was striving to present a united front in its response to the war in Ukraine. This divergence highlighted the difficulty of maintaining a cohesive sanctions regime when individual countries have differing interests and priorities.
Similarly, Slovakia, another EU member state, sought exemptions from sanctions due to its heavy reliance on Russian oil. This dependence made it challenging for Slovakia to fully comply with the sanctions regime without jeopardizing its energy security and economic stability. This case illustrated the complexities of disentangling deeply intertwined economic relationships and the potential for unintended consequences when sanctions are implemented without considering the specific circumstances of individual countries.
Even Germany, a leading advocate for reducing European dependence on Russian gas, faced challenges in transitioning away from Russian energy due to its historical reliance on these imports. Germany's efforts to diversify its energy sources and develop alternative infrastructure were hampered by the sheer scale of the task, the long lead times involved, and the economic costs associated with the transition. This example demonstrated the inertia inherent in established energy systems and the difficulty of rapidly shifting away from deeply entrenched dependencies, even when the political will exists.
These cases revealed the inherent limitations of sanctions as a tool of foreign policy. While they can inflict significant economic pain and exert political pressure, they are not a silver bullet, and their effectiveness can be eroded by inconsistencies, loopholes, and unintended consequences. The Russian experience underscored the need for a nuanced and calibrated approach to sanctions, taking into account the complexities of global trade, the interconnectedness of economies, and the potential for unforeseen consequences.
Beyond exploiting these inconsistencies, Russia also demonstrated a degree of adaptability in the face of sanctions. It sought to mitigate the impact by offering discounted oil to countries like China and India, which were willing to increase their purchases of Russian energy at lower prices. This shift towards new markets helped to offset some of the losses caused by reduced sales to Western nations. It also highlighted the limits of sanctions in a world where alternative buyers and suppliers exist.
Nabiullina's role in managing the fallout from declining energy revenues was crucial. She focused on stabilizing currency reserves, ensuring the continued financing of energy infrastructure projects, and exploring new channels for energy exports. Her efforts aimed to cushion the blow of sanctions and maintain the flow of energy exports, which remained a critical lifeline for the Russian economy.
However, the sanctions also exposed the vulnerability of Russia's heavy reliance on energy exports. The restrictions on technology and investment stemming from the sanctions limited Russia's ability to develop new energy resources and modernize its existing infrastructure. This highlighted the long-term challenge for Russia in diversifying its economy, reducing its dependence on energy, and developing more sustainable sources of growth and revenue.
Faced with increasing isolation from the West, Russia actively sought to forge new economic partnerships and alliances with non-Western countries. This pivot towards the East represented a strategic shift in Russia's foreign policy and economic strategy.
China emerged as a crucial partner, with the two countries deepening their economic ties across multiple sectors. Trade between Russia and China grew significantly, with energy exports playing a key role. Russia also sought to expand its economic cooperation with India, another major emerging economy, which took advantage of discounted Russian oil to increase its energy imports.
Beyond China and India, Russia engaged with a range of other non-Western nations, including those in Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Africa. These partnerships aimed to diversify Russia's economic relationships, reduce its reliance on Western markets, and strengthen its position in the evolving global economy.
A key aspect of this pivot was the promotion of trade in local currencies. Russia actively encouraged the use of the ruble and other non-dollar currencies in its international transactions. This move intended to reduce dependence on the US dollar and mitigate the impact of potential financial sanctions.
Russia also became involved in the development of alternative financial systems, such as the BRICS New Development Bank, which aims to provide an alternative to Western-dominated institutions. These efforts reflect a broader trend of countries seeking to reduce their reliance on the US dollar and create a more multipolar financial system.
However, Russia's pivot to the east also faced limitations. The threat of secondary sanctions from Western nations made some countries hesitant to engage too closely with Russian businesses. The reliance on discounted energy sales raised concerns about the long-term sustainability of this approach, and the limited access to international financial markets and restrictions on technology transfer posed challenges for Russia's economic development.
Despite these challenges, Russia remained committed to seeking new economic partnerships and reducing its reliance on the West. The success of this pivot will have significant implications for the future of the Russian economy and its position in the global order.
Elvira Nabiullina's leadership of the Russian central bank has been a subject of both praise and criticism. Domestically, she faced criticism from oligarchs and business leaders who argued that her tight monetary policies hindered economic growth. The high interest rates implemented to combat inflation squeezed profit margins and discouraged investment, leading to concerns about economic stagnation and job losses.
However, Nabiullina also received recognition for her pragmatic approach to managing crises and her commitment to maintaining the stability of the Russian financial system. Her supporters point to her decisive actions in response to the 2014 ruble crisis and her efforts to mitigate the impact of the more recent sanctions. They argue that her policies were essential in preventing a more severe economic collapse and preserving the integrity of the Russian financial system.
Nabiullina's legacy will likely be debated for years to come, with her tenure marked by both extraordinary challenges and significant achievements. Her ability to navigate the Russian economy through a period of unprecedented turbulence will undoubtedly be a subject of study for economists and policymakers alike.
The future of the Russian economy under Nabiullina's leadership remains uncertain. The effectiveness of her strategies will continue to be scrutinized as Russia grapples with the ongoing impact of sanctions and the evolving geopolitical landscape. The long-term consequences of the sanctions on the Russian economy and the broader global economic order remain to be seen.
The ongoing conflict in Ukraine, the evolving geopolitical landscape, and the potential for future sanctions regimes in other contexts will continue to shape the trajectory of the Russian economy and its place in the world.
The leadership of Elvira Nabiullina during this turbulent period has been both remarkable and controversial. Her actions have demonstrated the capacity of central bankers to navigate extraordinary challenges and to mitigate the worst effects of economic shocks. Her legacy will ultimately be judged on the long-term outcomes of her policies and the ability of the Russian economy to achieve sustainable and inclusive growth in a rapidly changing world.
The transformation of the Russian economy under Nabiullina serves as a reminder of the complex and interconnected nature of the global economy and the profound impact of geopolitical events on economic outcomes. The Russian experience offers valuable insights into the dynamics of economic sanctions, their effectiveness as a tool of foreign policy, and the challenges of economic management in turbulent times.
As we conclude this deep dive into the evolution of the Russian economy under Elvira Nabiullina, it is clear that her tenure has been a pivotal period in Russia's economic history. Her decisions and the effectiveness of her strategies will continue to be analyzed and debated as Russia charts its course in an increasingly uncertain world.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive. I hope you found this exploration of Elvira Nabiullina's leadership of the Russian economy as insightful as I did. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating journey into the complexities of our world.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.